Hi there, I'm Joni Deutsch. I am a podcast producer here at WFAE in Charlotte, North Carolina. I'm also a producer for She Says. It's a new podcast from WFAE, our first investigative podcast that travels a winding road of a sexual assault survivor as we investigate the case that's been basically 3 years in the making. In case you missed it, the 5th episode of She Says, the podcast, is available right now for free on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, NPR One, wherever you have podcasts, as well as at WFAE.org/She Says. We've been doing weekly video episodes just to get some questions answered that you might be having about the podcast. And today on the 5th episode, we are going to talk to Sarah Delia, who is the host of She Says. Hi, Sarah.
Hey.
And we're going to be answering some of your questions, some of our questions. And we hope that if you have more questions, you go to WFAE.org/She Says and fill out the little form there, and we'll try to answer them. So Sarah, the 5th episode is out. When you started She Says, there was a winding road analogy that you started the series off with. And the 5th episode is called Parallel Road, the Parallel Road. And I'm wondering, how does that relate, this parallel road, to the winding road of Linda's case?
Yeah, so the parallel road is in reference to the story of Harold Medlock that we really dive into this episode of She Says. And what's similar to the road that Linda's on is that there are a lot of complicated twists and turns that he had to deal with, but it's a very different story at the same time. So they're running next to each other, but two different stories. And Harold's story really dives into his decision. He was with the CMPD for over 2 decades, and then he decided he wanted to become a chief of police, but to do that, he was going to have to move. So he became chief of police of Fayetteville, I believe in 2013. And during the course of that time, there was an audit of Fayetteville's sexual assault kits, and it turned out that there had been 333 rape kits that had been destroyed from 1995 to 2008, so long before Harold Medlock ever stepped foot in Fayetteville as chief of police, but something that he decided that he was going to take responsibility of.
333 rape kits being destroyed in the span of, almost a decade.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a normal thing for rape kits to be destroyed? Like, where is the outrage in this story?
Well, the thing that's interesting is that they didn't do anything illegal, and other departments that were doing that at that time weren't doing anything illegal, because it wasn't until 2009 that North Carolina got a new state law that said while a case was still open, you had to hold on to that physical evidence. You had to hold on to that sexual assault kit. So legally, they weren't doing anything wrong. But as a lieutenant from Fayetteville, who we spoke to for this story, said, it wasn't a good practice. It was a bad practice. It's not something that they should have done, but it wasn't anything illegal. We've seen other departments across the state after 2009 change their policies. For instance, the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department, they don't have to do this under state law, but they decided that they were going to hold on to rape kits indefinitely, because you just never know if you're going to need that physical evidence again.
So we talked about Harold in the first act of the 5th episode. Getting to the second act, we get into Linda's story again, her winding road. And we begin by you saying that it's been, almost 2 years, a little over 2 years since the assault occurred, but it's been about a year since she did the internet search where she thought that she found the individual, Mr. X, who was the one that assaulted her. And in this second act of the podcast episode, she actually gets a call that says that the detective got a DNA swab from this person, this individual. Why did it take so long for that to occur after Linda said, this could be the guy, you should go after him?
Yeah, so some timeline stuff from the time that her assault happens to the time that the detective calls to say that we got the swab and that there's this match. That was about 2 years and 8 months. And she actually sent me a screenshot of this counter that she had, so that's 988 days. So, that's kind of interesting. So why did it take so long? I mean, that's the question. That's a really good question. It took so long because, one, of the backlog. It took a long time for her kit to actually be tested. And then if folks are caught up on episode 4, we learn about what kind of happened with this mysterious CODIS hit, that there had been a hit, but that the CMPD lab wasn't aware of it. when it originally was communicated to them that there was a problem with this DNA match. So it's a series of unfortunate events, but it does kind of start with the backlog, the problem of having a backlog crime lab, and that it took so long for her kit to even be tested in the first place.
Now, at this point in the podcast episode, as well as the timeline that you were just referring to, which we have on our website, wfae.org/shesays, the police, CMPD, know that she is recording the conversation she's having with them. So have you heard a difference in the conversations, the tapes she's provided, between when they did not know that she was recording the conversations and then when they realized she is recording everything we're saying to her?
There's definitely a change in tone. I think that's fair to say, and I think that the detective becomes much more direct and to the point, and the conversations become a little bit more, here's the information you need, we're gonna, get off the phone. I mean, it's not like the detective is disrespectful or anything like that, but there is a shift in tone of, I'm going to be very careful as to what I'm saying to you now because I know everything I'm saying is being recorded.
Yeah, and I think even in that call where the detective says, I'm getting the DNA swab, that was a voicemail. I mean, that was just I'm not even going to, maybe she wasn't able to, but it was just straight to the point of, I'm saying this, click the phone.
Right, and she wasn't, and she did call. Linda wasn't able to answer at that time, so it ended up being a voicemail. But to your point, it wasn't like she was like, well, I have something to tell you, call me back. It was, I'm going to give you this information as soon as I possibly can. It's going to be through a voicemail.
So speaking of tone and intent, forgiveness seems to be a big theme in this 5th episode. You have forgiveness at the beginning with Harold and Fayetteville and how they are saying, we're sorry for the destruction of these rape kits. But then you have a sort of forgiveness at the tail end when you're having the conversation with Peacock about this case and how they, in Peacock's words, she regrets the situation occurred. But do you see that there is a difference or similarity between how Fayetteville handled their sort of sexual assault cases and how Peacock and CMPD are talking about Linda's case?
Yeah, I think that the language that police use is very purposeful and very deliberate. And so when Captain Melanie Peacock says it's a regrettable situation, what she's referring to is this mysterious CODIS hit, how things kind of worked out in the case. She's not specifically talking about the ways that the detective spoke to Linda, which is really what Linda would like an apology for, and how she feels like she was treated. What I think is interesting about Harold Medlock and the way that he chose to take ownership over something was just sort of, he was able to say, this is the way I would want to be treated if this was my life and this is what was going on. And if someone that I know was sexually assaulted and their kit was destroyed, I would, expect an apology.
Yeah.
And that's him putting himself in the victim's shoes, I think. And just a level of empathy that I think is very unique to Harold. So, I think there is a clear difference with how, at least in this situation, and they are two different situations, but at least in this situation, we do see a difference in empathy and a difference of, I think, ownership. Harold apologized for something that happened while he wasn't even chief of police. So I think that's very interesting and kind of speaks to what he valued as an officer and as the chief of police.
Speaking of Linda, you just mentioned that she's wanting not an apology for the kind of procedural things that happen within the station with the CODIS database and the backlog, but more so just an apology for what she has felt and experienced as a victim working with the police. At the time that you spoke with her for this episode, she had not received an apology, the apology that she is wanting. I know it's been a few months since that conversation. Has she received that apology since then?
So she has not received a personal apology from CMPD, and the clip that I talked to her about the apology was a pretty recent conversation because I just wanted to make sure there hadn't been any big news. So I feel like I can say pretty confidently that she feels like she hasn't gotten an apology from the CMPD. And I asked her, we talked for a while about that, and I said, who would you want that apology from? Would you want it from Captain Peacock or who would be the most appropriate person? And she said, to me, Captain Peacock is just, I see her at the press conferences, I see her more as like a
messenger.
Yeah, exactly. She didn't really deal with Captain Peacock during the course of her investigation.
Yeah.
She was like, it would be much more meaningful to hear from the person that I was, trying to have a relationship with, which was Detective Kogel.
Right. So the final audio moment of this 5th episode, which was released this past week, it was chilling.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard from a number of people who said they just had goosebumps when they heard it. Can you talk about that moment, that recording, and what it means for this case?
Yeah, I don't want to give the ending away too much for folks that haven't listened, so if you haven't, there's your spoiler alert, but there is a point where there is an arrest, and when an arrest is made, this is just the way our system works. You get to know who made that accusation against you. And so Linda had kind of felt a little bit anonymous towards the person that she believes to be her assailant. And that anonymity is just it's like a veil that's dropped. And so she realizes that this person not only knows who she is, but knows what she looks like now. And that's a fear that she lives with and that her family lives with. And we're going to get more into those fears as we go on with the rest of the season.
Now we're answering some questions that we've been having, or that you may have been having out there in the world, but next week's episode is going to be a little different from She Says format, and we're actually going to be answering your questions. So Sarah, do you want to talk a little bit about next week's format?
Yeah, so next week is completely up to our listeners. So if you've had a question about the reporting process, the production process, why we've done certain things, why we haven't done other things. Maybe you have a question about how the crime lab works. Maybe you have a question about something we asked the police. Or maybe there's just something you're wondering about that we haven't asked anyone yet. We'd love to hear those questions. Our plan is to play back your questions, or you can write us at shesays@wfae.org. And we'll read some of those questions out loud and really dive into what you're curious about. And it can be about anything. It can be about Linda's case. If it's appropriate, then we will answer it. And if it's something about the reporting process, then we're happy to kind of reveal the curtain, and pull it back and show you some of how we've been working and the tough conversations that we've had to have as we've gone along this reporting process.
Yeah, we've been getting some great questions about the production, about the case, about reporting on it. So feel free. It doesn't have to be a big question. It can be a small one. It can be tons of small ones. Just go to wfae.org/shesays to get that in. Sarah, do you have any final thoughts before we end our little video this morning?
I really love episode 5. I think Harold Medlock is someone that She Says reporter Alex Olgin and I spoke to several months ago, and after I spoke to him, I just couldn't wait to write about his experience, because I think it's just so interesting and unique, and he's very candid, very genuine, and I really think that people will enjoy hearing his story.
I think so too, and I've enjoyed hearing it. And do you think that he's going to be coming back again later on in the series, or do you think this might be his last hurrah in She Says?
I don't know yet.
Yeah.
There might be another opportunity to hear back from him, but definitely take the time to listen to this, because we really dive into his story this episode.
So otherwise, stay tuned. He might come back. All right, well, Sarah, thank you so much for the hard work. Thanks for joining us today, too, for the little video. Thank you out there for watching, and of course, for those who have listened to She Says, the first 5 episodes of the podcast, which made the top 200 of Apple Podcasts a few weeks ago. She Says is available right now. You can find it on Apple Podcasts, on Google Play, NPR One, wherever you find podcasts, as well as at wfae.org/shesays. Make sure to subscribe, rate, and review, and also give us your questions at wfae.org/shesays. I'm Joni Deutsch, and from WFAE in Charlotte, we'll see you next time.